An all-inclusive resort sounds like it should be a terrible business. Unlimited food, unlimited drinks, entertainment, a room, all for one flat price, paid months before a guest ever sets foot on the property. And yet these resorts routinely post some of the highest profit margins in the entire hospitality industry. The first advantage is timing. Guests pay the full package price weeks or months in advance, which means the resort is sitting on cash long before it has to deliver a single meal or drink. That upfront payment gets invested, used to cover payroll, or reinvested into the property, all while the guest's actual visit is still just a future date on a calendar. Traditional hotels earn money one room night at a time. All-inclusive resorts front-load an entire week's revenue the moment someone books. The modern all-inclusive concept traces back to Club Med, founded in France in the late 1940s, which pioneered the idea of a single price covering lodging, meals, drinks, and activities at a vacation village. The format spread through the Caribbean and Mexico in the following decades precisely because those regions offered the two ingredients the model needs most: cheap labor and a climate reliable enough to guarantee occupancy nearly year-round. What started as a way to simplify vacation planning for guests turned out to be, almost by accident, one of the most efficient revenue models the hospitality industry had ever produced. Here's the part most guests never think about. Not everyone eats and drinks the same amount. A family with young kids might barely touch the bar and skip half the buffet meals. A couple on a bachelor party will eat and drink far beyond what they paid for in food and beverage cost. Resorts build their pricing around the average guest, not the extreme one. And because low-consumption guests vastly outnumber high-consumption guests at almost any property, the light users are effectively subsidizing everyone else. The math works out in the resort's favor almost every single time. This is why all-inclusive resorts almost never publish detailed per-guest consumption data. The moment that data became public, it would reveal just how lopsided the actual usage patterns are, and how much of the pricing model depends on most guests simply not eating and drinking anywhere near what they technically could. Predictable revenue also means predictable staffing, and that's a much bigger advantage than it sounds. A resort knows its dinner buffet will serve roughly the same number of guests every night of a given season, so kitchen staff, servers, and bartenders can be scheduled well in advance instead of scrambling to react to a slow Tuesday or an unexpectedly busy Saturday. Overstaffing and understaffing are two of the most expensive mistakes any hospitality business can make, and the all-inclusive model largely eliminates the guesswork by guaranteeing occupancy and consumption patterns look almost identical from one week to the next. Because a resort knows exactly how many guests will be on property on any given night, it can order food and beverage inventory with startling precision, cutting waste dramatically compared to a restaurant guessing at nightly walk-in demand. Bulk purchasing agreements with food distributors and beverage suppliers bring per-unit costs down further. And critically, resorts control which alcohol brands show up behind the bar. When a cocktail menu lists a margarita or a rum punch, the liquor poured is almost always a lower-cost local or house label spirit, an industry practice sometimes called the house pour, regardless of what brand name might appear on a laminated drink menu. All-inclusive resorts are often built in destinations with intentionally limited walkable access to the surrounding town, and that isn't an accident. If a guest has to leave the resort to get a different meal or a different drink, that's revenue leaving the property entirely. By keeping guests fed, entertained, and comfortable without ever needing to leave, resorts capture spending that would otherwise go to a restaurant down the road or a bar in town. Every hour a guest spends inside the gates is an hour of potential extra revenue the resort can still capture. Photography packages, professional wedding coordination for destination weddings, and swim-up minibar service upgrades follow the exact same logic. Each one is optional, each one is easy to decline. And yet resort data consistently shows a meaningful share of guests upgrade at least once during a typical stay, particularly on special occasions like anniversaries or honeymoons, where guests are primed to treat the trip as worth a little extra spending. Almost no all-inclusive resort is actually all-inclusive once you look closely. Premium liquor brands, top-shelf tequila, a bottle of wine above a certain price point, specialty spa treatments, and adults-only or reservation-required restaurants routinely sit behind an extra charge. Off-property excursions, which guests overwhelmingly book directly through the resort rather than researching independently, are frequently marked up 20 to 30% compared to booking the same tour locally. None of this breaks the promise of the package. It simply defines what counts as included narrowly enough that upgrading feels natural, even expected, once a guest is already relaxed and on vacation. Bulk contracts often run for an entire season or even a full year at fixed pricing, which protects the resort from short-term commodity price spikes, but also means a bad negotiation locked in months earlier can quietly eat into margins the whole season through, regardless of what happens to ingredient prices in the meantime. This entire structure depends heavily on where a resort operates. All-inclusive resorts cluster overwhelmingly in destinations like Mexico, Jamaica, and the Dominican Republic specifically because labor costs there are low enough to absorb the cost of unlimited food and mid-shelf alcohol while still turning a healthy profit. Try to run the same all-inclusive model in a country with high minimum wages and expensive imported food, and the margins collapse almost immediately. The business only works because staffing costs, not the food and drink itself, are usually the single largest expense line resorts have to manage, and cheap local labor is what makes unlimited consumption financially survivable in the first place. Ultimately, the all-inclusive model succeeds because it converts an inherently unpredictable business, hospitality, where demand swings night to night and guest spending varies wildly, into something closer to a subscription. Resorts can forecast staffing, food orders, and cash flow with a level of precision a traditional a la carte hotel or restaurant simply cannot match. Recent industry data shows resort EBITDA margins climbing to their highest levels since before the pandemic, and in top luxury destinations like the Maldives, profit margins on room revenue alone have reportedly reached as high as 85%. The flat price guests pay isn't a discount the resort is generously offering. It's a carefully engineered number that guarantees the business wins on average, even when any single guest technically gets a great deal. Destinations without this kind of walkable barrier, like some all-inclusive properties built directly inside busy towns, tend to see noticeably lower food and beverage capture rates, which is part of why the most successful all-inclusive resorts are so often built in relatively remote or self-contained coastal locations, rather than in the middle of an existing city. On top of the base all-inclusive model, many resort chains layer in loyalty programs that further lock and repeat spending. Points earned on one stay push guests toward booking directly with the same resort brand again rather than shopping around. And elite tiers unlock perks like room upgrades or late checkout that cost the resort very little to provide, but meaningfully increase the perceived value of staying loyal. This turns a single vacation into part of a longer relationship. And repeat guests who already trust the brand tend to spend more freely on upsells than first-time visitors who are still evaluating whether the resort delivers on its promises. The all-inclusive formula isn't foolproof, and rising costs are testing it in real time. Food and beverage commodity prices have grown more volatile in recent years, and labor costs in popular resort destinations have been climbing 6 to 8% annually, squeezing the exact margin the entire model depends on. Some resort operators have responded by quietly shrinking portion sizes, narrowing the included alcohol selection even further, or adding more reservation-required restaurants that function as soft upsells. Guests who have visited the same resort chain repeatedly over several years often notice this shift gradually, even if no single change feels dramatic enough to complain about on its own. There's also a real estate dimension to this that guests rarely consider. Large, all-inclusive resorts typically sit on enormous parcels of coastal land, often acquired decades ago at a fraction of current market value, long before the surrounding area developed into a tourism destination. That land appreciation alone can represent a meaningful share of a resort ownership group's total returns, separate entirely from nightly operations. Some resort groups also structure ownership so that the operating company managing day-to-day guest experience is a completely different entity from the one holding the underlying real estate, allowing profits to be optimized and taxed differently at each layer. It's worth comparing this model to its closest cousin, the modern cruise ship, which runs on a strikingly similar playbook. Cruise lines also collect payment well in advance, control every dining and beverage option on board, and use tiered packages, specialty restaurants, and shore excursions as upsells almost identical to a resort structure. The key difference is that a cruise ship is also its own hotel, restaurant, and transportation system rolled into one moving vessel, which means the economics are even more tightly controlled since there's no possibility of a guest wandering off property to spend money somewhere else, at least not until the ship reaches port for the day. Put all of this together and the picture becomes clear. Upfront cash flow, statistically predictable consumption averages, bulk purchasing power, tightly controlled staffing, land value appreciation, and a steady stream of optional upsells all stack on top of each other. No single one of these factors would make all-inclusive resorts especially profitable on its own. It's the combination, each piece reinforcing the others, that turns what looks on paper like an all-you-can-eat business model into one of the more reliably profitable structures in global hospitality. One that keeps expanding even as travelers become more aware of exactly how the math works against them on any individual night. There's also a psychological layer to why this works so well on guests specifically. Once someone has already paid a large flat sum in advance, a strange thing happens to their spending behavior. Many guests actually consume less than they would if they were paying per drink or per meal, because the initial payment already feels like the expense is handled, and there's a subtle reluctance to feel like you're constantly grabbing more just because it's technically included. Resorts have effectively turned unlimited access into something that, for a meaningful share of guests, doesn't get fully used, which only strengthens the averages working in the property's favor. This also explains why family-oriented all-inclusive resorts and adults-only or couples resorts often price so differently for what looks like a similar level of luxury. Families with children tend to consume less alcohol per person and skew towards simpler meals kids will actually eat, shifting the consumption averages further in the resort's favor. Adults-only and couples-focused resorts, where alcohol consumption runs meaningfully higher across the board, typically price their packages higher from the outset specifically to offset that shift in the averages, rather than relying purely on light users subsidizing heavy ones the way family resorts can. So the next time you hand over one flat price for a week of unlimited everything, remember that the resort already ran these numbers long before you booked. The averages, the bulk deals, the house pours, and the upsells are all working quietly in the background, and they're the real reason the math almost always favors the house.